The Kings play a pair of overtime games, including a wild game in Ottawa. That and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We would love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're also on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, the LA Kings have now played 3 games of their season-long 7-game road trip, including a morning game, LA time, earlier on Monday. But since our last show on Friday, we've had not 1, but 2 games to talk about, and it felt weird for me to get into Monday's game without first talking about Saturday's game. So we're going to go in chronological order and quickly recap Saturday's game in Boston before we get to Monday's game in Ottawa. The Kings going into that game on Saturday in Boston, coming off a 3-1 season opening win in Buffalo. The Kings were outplayed for the first 2 periods of that game, but rallied in the third period behind a natural hat trick from captain Anze Kopitar and a 32-save performance from goaltender Darcy Kuemper. Now, we knew the Kings would have to play much better in Boston to try and improve to 2-0 on the season. As far as the Kings lineup for that game number 2 of the season in Boston, the exact same lineup we saw in the season opener. Anze Kopitar centering Adrian Kempe and Alex Laferriere. It was Quinton Byfield centering Kevin Fiala and Warren Foegele. Tanner Jeannot with Philip Deneau centering, and Trevor Moore along as well. The fourth line, Alex Turcotte with Andre Lee and Trevor Lewis. Interesting that, for what it's worth, the second line out on the ice after the Kopitar line was the Byfield line. So are they the de facto second line and Deneau is actually the third line? Not sure about that. Not that it matters too much, but an observation. The defensive pairings were Jordan Spence and Mikey Anderson, Vladislav Gavrikov and Kyle Burrows, Joel Edmondson and Brandt Clark, and the goaltender was Darcy Kuemper. Again, the exact same lineup we saw in the season opening win in Buffalo. As for this game in Boston, we would see a scoreless first period, but right away, obvious that the Kings were a different team than we saw in Buffalo, playing a much more responsible game while going toe-to-toe with a better Boston Bruins team. LA would eventually take the lead in the second period on a power play goal from Quinton Byfield to Philip Deneau. Deneau would put a shot on goal with Alex Turcotte in front of the net. The rebound went to Trevor Moore, and he put it home to give the Kings a 1-0 lead. Boston, however, would tie up the game later in the period while skating 4-on-4. Jordan Spence turned the puck over. Boston's Brad Marchand put a shot on goal. Darcy Kuemper made the save, but the rebound went to Elias Lindholm, who scored to make it 1-1. Kuemper moving from his right to his left on that one. Not the easiest save in the world, but he did obviously give up a pretty good rebound. After a scoreless third period, we would go in overtime. Sudden death. Brandt Clark had an extended shift for the Kings. He went off to make a line change. Adrian Kempe came out to replace him, but he couldn't get back into the play, and Bruins star David Pastrnak would end up scoring to win it as the Kings would lose 2-1 to the Boston Bruins. As for the game stats in this one, the Kings outshot the Bruins 34-25, so a much better job by the Kings of putting shots on goal as opposed to their season opener in Buffalo. Both power plays were ineffective in this game. Both teams were over 5 with a man advantage. As far as faceoffs won, Boston gets the advantage there 27-22. Block shots went to the Bruins 19-15, and hits favored Boston 29-24. As this was yet another overtime game in Boston for the Kings. If you've been paying attention to recent history, that is not only not uncommon, it's expected. 7th straight game in Boston between the Kings and Bruins that was decided in overtime. Of course, last year it was Brandt Clark scoring out of the penalty box to end it with his first career NHL goal. This time the Bruins get some revenge. The Kings had won 5 of the 7 previous overtime matchups against the Bruins, before the loss on Saturday. As from quote from head coach Jim Hiller, what did he think about the improvements from game 2 to game number 1? He had this to say, quote, I think that was a lot closer to how we played in the preseason, and that's a lot closer to how we want to play. We took too many penalties again. The penalty killers did a heck of a job tonight. Against Buffalo, we came out clean, but there were some reads, some improvements tonight, and I thought we did an excellent job on the penalty kill. I thought that was probably the strongest part of our game. End quote. And then again was head coach Jim Hiller after the 2-1 overtime loss to the Boston Bruins. So what was the big takeaway from that game in Boston? To me, it was obviously just a much better game played by the LA Kings. We talked about it. They were lucky to escape Buffalo with a win. They needed to play a lot better hockey, 3 periods of solid hockey to have a better result. Of course, the ironic thing is they did play a much better 3 periods of hockey, but they didn't get the better result. They didn't even get the same result. They had an overtime loss rather than a regulation win. Still good to get a point out of, I suppose. But again, just as Jim Hiller said, this was the LA Kings team that we saw most of the preseason. So obviously a good improvement for the Kings, even though they weren't able to get the 2 points, had to settle for the 1 point. So what else was good for LA? I thought Trevor Moore had a real good game. I'm going to talk more about him coming up in a second. Darcy Kemper was solid again. That said, he was able to see just about every shot. The Kings defense did a nice job of protecting the crease, and most of the shots were from some distance. The Kings penalty kill looks great at this point. I thought the penalty kill over the first 2 games and what we saw in the preseason, I love how they are much more aggressive. I like how Jim Hiller is rotating 3 different groups of forwards on the PK rather than normally you would see just 2. He's using Kopitar and Kempe, which he's used in the past. He's using Danault and Moore, which he's done in the past, but he's also incorporated Byfield and Fogle as penalty killers up front as well. I like that kind of 3 pairing rotation he's got going on. It helps to keep those guys fresh. You got more players involved as well. And the Kings are getting as many shots shorthanded as they're giving up on the power play, at least going into this game. As far as the first 2 games, they're not just looking to dump and make a change. They're actually looking for scoring chances. And I think that affects other teams in being more cautious when they're on the power play. And also, I think it also can get them into a mindset where they want to trade chances with the Kings. And that's not really what you want in the power play. You want to set up your power play and move the puck around and use that extra man rather than just going back and forth with the other team. What was not so good for the Kings in the overtime loss to Boston? Still looking for more at this point from Kevin Fiala and Adrian Kempe offensively. I thought Kempe still had a solid defensive game, but that's not what he and Fiala are paid for necessarily, and what we need from them more. I don't think either have been bad through 2 games, but they have not been impactful, and those guys need to be impactful as 2 of the top offensive weapons for the LA Kings. Only give out 3 stars when the Kings win a game. Typically, we don't give out 3 stars when the Kings lose a game, but I do want to recognize a Kings player even in defeat, and that would be our royal performance. And we're going to award that to Kings forward Trevor Moore. Talked about it after the Buffalo game, wanted to see more from Fiala and from Kempe and Moore, last year's leading goal scorer. Well, he showed up in this game. He was flying all over the ice, scored the only goal of the game. But even other than that, he was very noticeable throughout the game. He was active on the penalty kill as well. Best game of the young season for Trevor Moore, and hopefully this moves him forward. And good to see him get a goal as well. So the Kings played a very good game in Boston. How would that translate into an early holiday game in Ottawa earlier today? We'll get into that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And of course, FanDuel is there for you to bet on Major League Baseball's postseason. Dodgers are in the NLCS against the Mets. They won game 1, but lost game 2 earlier today. How's game 3 going to go in New York? Dodgers are a plus 180 to win it all, and you can place bets on the Dodgers throughout the postseason. Join FanDuel, browse the latest betting odds of your favorite sports and teams on the Sportsbook app, and get in on the action. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. So the Kings were back in action in a special holiday game Monday morning LA time. It was Thanksgiving in Canada and obviously in the Canadian capital of Ottawa, where the LA Kings were in action. So they had a special holiday game. And this would turn out to be a very wild game. The Kings would go with the exact same lineup for a third straight game. That included Darcy Kemper making his third straight start. So somehow, if you don't know how this game went, I'm not going to go into a deep dive as far as the scoring recap because it's only a 30-minute show. But things started off well for the Kings as they jumped out to a 2-0 lead on a power play goal from Kevin Fiala. Talked about wanting to see more from him. And an even strength goal from Alex Turcotte. The shot was from Turcotte. It went off the body of Trevor Lewis and in. So Lewis does get credit for the goal. And again, the Kings had a 2-0 lead. So great start. But Ottawa would cut into the lead. They scored a power play goal of their own, and the Kings had a 2-1 lead after one, but things were just getting started. The Kings would add to their lead once again on the power play. Adrian Kempe, who we wanted to see more of, scores a power play goal, 3-1 LA, but the Senators would respond on a goal from former King Zach McEwen to make it 3-2. Kings come right back to make it 4-2. Nice deflection by Alex Laferriere of an Alex Burrows shot. But Ottawa would respond with another power play goal to make it 4-3. And then just 19 seconds later, the Sens would tie it up at 4-4. Kings would reclaim the lead. We're still in the second period. Kevin Fiala's second power play goal of the game. But Ottawa would tie it up. Zach McEwen's second goal of the game. And after 2 periods, we were tied at 5-5. In the third period, Alex Laferriere gave the Kings a lead on a steal, move, and shot that beat the goaltender to make it 6-5 LA. Ottawa, though, would again score to tie it up at 6-6. The Senators then scored the next goal to take the lead for the first time in this game, 7-6. The Kings, though, would tie it. Tanner Jeannot with a wrist shot, tracking down a loose puck, and we were tied 7-7. And we would go into overtime. In the overtime, Ottawa gets the goal. Kevin Fiala, flat-footed on defense, didn't pick up a Ottawa player on a drop pass. He ends up getting room, puts a wrist shot in the net. And the Kings lose in Ottawa 8-7 in overtime. As far as the game stats on this one, let's see, do we have that? We do not have that. So we have the wrong game stats up there. But needless to say, a crazy game in Ottawa for the LA Kings. We'll see if we can pull up the game stats real quick here. But certainly following up a solid performance in game number 2 in Boston. Did not do that, obviously, in the game in Ottawa. As far as the shots on goal, favoring Ottawa 41-26. As far as the power plays go, the Kings 3 power play goals, 3 for 5. That was great. But the penalty kill, which had been perfect through 2 games, gave up 4 power play goals on 6 opportunities. Hits favored the Senators, 25-22. Block shots favored LA, 22-10. Face-offs, Kings won 38. The Senators won 30. But clearly, a crazy game, not what you're looking for. I got a tweet from, or a text, I should say, from a longtime Kings fan and one of my beer league teammates, Brandon Rohrbacher. And it said, "What was that?" And my response was, early season wackiness, which is sometimes what you see earlier in the season. But Jim Miller, as far as what he saw in this game against Ottawa, he said, quote, "Well, we were up, but we don't think at any point we felt like we were in control of the game. We were pretty optimistic when we were up 4-2, so there's no real shift for me. I just think we were trying to get playing the type of game that we needed to play. I don't know that we got that for more than 3 or 4 shifts. It was penalties, power play, penalty kill. Our strength is 5-on-5, and we just never got that." End quote from head coach Jim Hiller. Now, I don't know about you, but games like this for me, if you've watched this show before, we've had a few of these. Thankfully, not too many. You think, oh, wow, we've got 15 goals scored in a game. How entertaining is that? I'm not entertained by these types of games, and I don't think they're fun. It's a lot of bad hockey to be honest. And I would be saying that if the Kings had won 8-7. I don't think either team is particularly happy about this performance. The Kings, though, I think are certainly a little less happy because they got the 1 point instead of 2. This did remind me a lot of that Kings Kraken game back at Crypto.com Arena in 2022 when the Kings lost to Seattle 9-8 in overtime. And sometimes you see games like this, usually early in the season. I'm honestly not taking too much away from this other than the obvious, and that is this is not the kind of game the LA Kings want to play. The big takeaway from this game, really a very much a mixed bag. You had some really good. There were some nice goals scored by the LA Kings. You had some really bad defensive coverage. I think individually it was a real mixed bag. Kevin Fiala had a up and down game. Darcy Kemper had an up and down game. There was some good and there was some really bad. Was this a better performance than the Kings had in Buffalo? I would say yes. And yet the result was still not getting the 2 points. They get the 1 point. So definitely not anywhere close to the performance we saw in Boston. But again, the result was the same. The Kings end up with an overtime loss. Jim Hiller talked in his introductory press conference when he was named full-time Kings head coach about the Kings having more of an offensive identity without losing their defensive identity. Well, they were definitely more offensive in this game, but their defensive identity was nowhere to be found against the Ottawa Senators. As I mentioned, it was a mixed bag. It wasn't all bad. What was good? Well, obviously, a lot of different players getting involved in the scoring. Tanner Jeannot gets his first as an LA King. We talked about Kempe and Fiala. We wanted them to get going. They certainly did. Fiala had 2 goals, both on the power play. Kempe had a goal and an assist, so good to see them get going. Brant Clark, the Ottawa native, had 3 assists. He did have a goal wiped away as well, which we'll talk about later. And Captain Andrei Kopitar had a 3-assist game as well. Kopitar tied with Larry Murphy, the former King, for 46th all-time in points in the NHL, 1,217. And the power play looked better, obviously. 3 power play goals in this game. What was not so good? Well, a lot. Clearly, the defense and the goaltending were not good enough. It was way too easy for the Senators to gain entry into the zone and to get into high-quality scoring areas. Darcy Kemper, after a great performance in Buffalo and a solid game in Boston, clearly wasn't good enough against Ottawa. Now, to be fair, he didn't have a ton of help from his teammates, but anytime you give up 8 goals, no matter what the circumstances, that's not good. I would say 2 of the goals were very stoppable, and then there was one he allowed when he wandered out of his net a bit too much. He got a deke put on him, and then he kind of fell on his butt, and the Senators player basically put it into an empty net. So great 2 games from Darcy Kemper, but not great in this one. And I think one thing that really bothered me were 2 really bad penalties that led directly to 2 Ottawa Senators goals. Kevin Fiala took his, I don't want to say typical stupid penalty, but it's part of his reputation. He's a guy you can get to do stupid retaliatory penalties, and he did it in this one. Just skate away. Most of the time, no matter what sport it is, they usually see the second guy, and he punched one of the Senators in the face as they were standing next to each other, going off for a line change because he felt he got slashed or whatever. And it's just selfish. It's stupid and it's selfish. And if he hasn't been called out already on it, somebody needs to call him out on it. Enough is enough. He's a veteran player. I mean, the only thing I can think of is he just kind of loses his mind in the moment because these penalties are obvious and they're dumb. And again, he's got a reputation where if you rattle him, if you do something he doesn't like, he's going to respond to it. And I'm not suggesting he be anybody's punching bag. But again, if you want to, take it to the other team, be the first guy and not the second guy. So we see this way too often from Kevin Fiala. He took a dumb penalty, and the Senators scored a goal directly off that. And Kyle Burroughs, the defenseman, put the puck into the seats. After a face-off win in the Kings zone, he had all day to do whatever he wanted to with the puck, and he did exactly what he didn't want to do with it, and that was throw it in the seats, which is a delay of game penalty, and Ottawa scored directly off that. Now, there was a Kopitar icing call that shouldn't have been made. Kopitar touched the puck. before it went into the zone, and they called icing on it. Shouldn't have been icing, but regardless, again, the face-off was won cleanly. He had it on his stick, had all day, no pressure, and he threw it in the seats. That can't happen. Two awful penalties that led directly to goals by the Ottawa Senators. And the Kings have not looked good in overtime. Two overtime games, two losses, and again, not looking particularly good in either of those games and not really getting any quality scoring opportunities. So, something that Jim Hiller will need to address as far as what the strategy is in overtime and what they need to do. And Kevin Fiala, frankly, on the overtime game-winning goal against Ottawa, got caught kind of flat-footed, was looking, not following his man, who got a step on him, and he went to the net and he scored. So, yeah, too much bad, obviously, for the LA Kings. But hey, I will say I'm happy they at least got a point out of it. In the end of the season, all these points matter, but just a really disjointed, wacky game and not a great effort from the LA Kings in that wild loss to the Ottawa Senators. Now, again, no 3 stars because the Kings didn't win, but we do have our royal performance because there usually is at least one player who played well and deserves to be recognized. And I'm definitely going with Alex Laferriere. 2 goals in this one, 5 shots on goal. He had 4 hits. I talked about in the offseason, he was a guy who needed to really embrace the role he was going to play, being elevated to that top line with Kopitar and Kempe. And he's absolutely done it so far. In my mind, he is forechecking. He is going to the net, but he still has, I think, some underrated skills. He had a real nice tip in on a deflection on a shot from, it was Kyle Burrows, I believe. Just got his stick on it in front of the net while he was being engaged with the defender, but he still was aware enough that he had his stick free. And even though his body was kind of being, he was being taken body on body, he was still able to put his stick out and deflect it in. And that was a nice, really nice play. And then the steal, the move around a defender, and then a score was fantastic. I know there were some saying they were unsure if Alex Laferriere could perform up to a top line player. He certainly played like a top line player in this game, and I think he's done a very good job so far on the season for the LA Kings. So Alex Laferriere gets our royal performance of the game in the loss against the Ottawa Senators. But obviously, that's not the kind of Kings hockey we're accustomed to seeing. They know it. Jim Hiller knows it. I expect to see them correct those things very soon for the next game, play a much more defensive-minded game. But obviously, that's not the way the Kings want to play. Up next, we'll talk a little bit about officiating. We're going to give you a rain report and more here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Guys, sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously, and we always want to be ready so we can perform in the bedroom. Hims provides access to treatments that can give you that boost of confidence so you can be ready whenever the mood strikes. Your sex life is important, but your schedule is busy. You don't have time to go to a doctor's office and get treated for ED. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compound products, which are not approved or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultant with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varied based on product and subscription plans. A couple of things I did want to mention from that Senators Kings game. Anytime those two teams get together, people want to know about Quinton Byfield versus Tim Stützle, a battle of the number 2 and number 3 overall picks in the 2020 NHL draft. We've talked about this a lot, much more last season than this season. But a lot of Kings fans were concerned. A lot of Kings fans were saying we should have taken Tim Stützle over Quinton Byfield. And I was basically parroting a lot of what the scouts were saying at the time, that Tim Stützle was the more NHL-ready player. He was going to be better quicker. But in the end, Quinton Byfield would have the better career and be the better player. And we're starting to see some of that now. Quinton Byfield's turning into a spectacular player. And Tim Stützle is still a very, very good player. But in the end, we'll see how it goes if the experts were right. But things appear to be trending in that direction, in my opinion. That said, in this particular head-to-head matchup, Quentin Byfield had no points and was a -3. He was on the ice for the overtime game winner. Tim Stützle had 3 assists. So the battle within the war, got to give it up to Tim Stützle in this round. Now, I'm not one to complain about officiating. If you've watched this show for any length of time, I think officials have a very tough job. And normally I don't like to use that as an excuse. I would just like to point out, however, in this particular game, the Kings had a goal wiped away on a goalie interference call on Brandt Clarke. Clarke crashed the net. The puck was shot on net. It went off his skate and in, and then he crashed into the goaltender. The Ottawa Senators challenged it for goalie interference, and the officials ruled that it was, in fact, goalie interference, and they wiped away the goal. Obviously, an important goal in a one-goal game, in an overtime game. Later in the game, the Kings challenged for goalie interference on an Ottawa goal. There was some contact with Darcy Kuemper right before the shot was taken, and they ruled that to be incidental contact. And goalie interference is one of those judgmental calls, but I thought they absolutely got it wrong in waving off the goal on Brandt Clarke. Yes, his collision with the goalie was a little bit more violent, if you want to call it that, than the other one. But I really think if you're really going to look at both of the plays, goalie interference is called when a player impedes the goaltender from playing his position. The contact Brandt Clarke had after the puck went off his foot didn't impede the goaltender from playing his position. He was not going to make that save regardless of what was going to happen. So to me, frankly, I thought both should have been good goals, but it makes no sense to allow one and not the other. Darcy Kuemper had a player hit him in the pad right before he was trying to move from his left to his right. Was it huge contact like the Clarke contact? No, but that was more of a situation where it affected Kemper's ability to play the puck more than it did for the Ottawa goaltender. Like I said, that the puck goes off of Clarke's skate. It's going into the net. The goalie's not going to make that save no matter what the contact is. So goalie interference is one of those hot button calls in the NHL. It's a lot of people get confused by it. I thought it was absolutely miscalled in this game. I thought both goals should have been good goals. I thought both goals came after incidental contact, but the Kings did not get that call. And obviously, like I said, one goal game, it was a factor. Not saying they lost because of that call, but that call went against them, and I didn't agree with it. As far as the rain report, did want to mention the Kings AHL affiliate, the Ontario Reign, played their first 2 games of the season over the weekend. They lost their season opener on Saturday to the San Jose Barracuda 5-0, but did bounce back for a win in the second game. 4-3 come from behind win. Samuel Helenius, who looked so great in the preseason for the Kings, scored 2 third-period goals to rally Ontario to the victory. The final one, just 34 seconds left in the game. Martin Chromiak and Tyler Madden also had goals as well. Phoenix Copley was in net in this one after Eric Portillo took the loss in the opening game. Copley allowed 3 goals on 22 shots to get the win. So the Reign are 1-1 on the young season. Up next, they will host Bakersfield on Friday. And real quick, congratulations to Kings goalie prospect Hampton Slukinski. He won his first ever collegiate start at Western Michigan University. The former Kings 4th-round pick in 2023 made 28 saves in a 4-1 win over Ferris State. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on tomorrow's show, we're going to get more into what we've seen so far for the Kings through 3 games. Also preview both upcoming back-to-back games against the Maple Leafs and the Canadiens. Wednesday, again, it's an early East Coast start time, so we'll have a recap show of the Kings-Leafs games Friday night. And then the next night, we'll have a recap of the Canadiens game Thursday night. So again, Wednesday and Thursday, both a pair of post-game recap shows after the Leafs game on Wednesday and the Canadiens game on Thursday. And Friday will be our usual Kings fan feedback show. If you want to get in on the feedback show, send an email. lockedoneddie@gmail.com is the email address, EDDIE. And if you're looking to post your thoughts on the YouTube episodes, we'd love that as well. Just post your comments in the comment section. It helps the algorithm. We appreciate it. We'd love for you to stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram. We're at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.